But I had to take off just a little bit early last night because we had the early record of Footy Classified, so I didn't get to do the usual Monday observations. I know you missed them, Gerard, so
I did.
Here they are. So we just asked Jake Melksham about Jack Viney. So I just wanted to speak about him a little bit because, as I said to Jake, when I'm watching, I find myself captivated by this guy and what he does, how hard he attacks the footy, and what he means to the Melbourne Footy Club. In his first 3 seasons, Jack Viney played in 10 wins, Gerard. He's seen coaches sacked. He's had significant career-threatening injuries, but he came through that with an enormous final series in 2021. And the way that he's going about it now, he's had such an admirable career, and I know how much he means to the Melbourne fans. So I just wanted to put his form on the radar because in the last 8 games, he's averaging 13 contested possessions, 6 clearances, 7 tackles, and I think he's added to his game where he's getting the ball. So 7 inside 50s he's averaging in the last 8 games, and it's coincided with Melbourne, I guess, turning their footy season around, and he's just been enormous. So I look forward to watching him throughout another final series because, as his teammate just said, he is built for September. Observation number 2, with Will Ashcroft out, and perhaps he's a bigger loss than we even forecast, and I know it's one game, but if teams don't target Lachie Neale with a solid tag every week, they're absolutely crazy. They're crazy. So for Touk Miller to put his hand up and keep Lachie Neale to 5 kicks, but was also running right himself and getting off him and challenging Lachie Neale. We saw Geelong triple team Lachie Neale in last year's final series and really went after him significantly. It was Atkins, it was Seld, it was Blixarves. They all went for him. So if teams don't do that, they're crazy. Let McCluggage, let Dunkley, let Lyons, let Berry get the ball. Don't let Lachie Neale would be an observation of mine after seeing what the Gold Coast did to him on the weekend. We had a terrific chat with Adam Kingsley last week on Sports Day, and we asked him about how often and how much they train for late game scenarios. Here's his response. So they've won 8 games by under 20 points this season.
Yep. Amazing. And they've only had one blowout loss too, so they've been competitive every game.
Yeah, and when he said organised, I was just watching. So Haynes was a sub, and then late in the game, he went behind the ball. He's done that before with fresh legs. So they did use, and those words were echoing in my head, that how well organised they did look.
Speaking of Nick Haynes, before you go on, Kane, one of the worst things in footy must be, if you're a sub, having to run afterwards. And as I was driving out of Ballarat on Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, there was Nick. No. He was heading off to run the streets of Ballarat, and whilst all his teammates were celebrating, singing the song.
It's not ideal, is it? But it's better doing it after a win than after a loss.
Clearly.
Let me tell you that. Observation number 4. Richmond's midfield got one of the all-time reality checks when the game was on the line in the last quarter against Melbourne on Sunday, which I find concerning considering they've sold its entire future to bolster this aspect of their playing list. So the Demons won clearances by 9, inside 50s by 15 in the last quarter, and Prestia, Hopper, Martin, Taranto, Pickett, Graham, Cochin and Bolton combined for 4 effective kicks in the last quarter. Combined. That's 4 between that whole group of experienced players, which is astounding to me when you think about it. So well done to Melbourne, and that was clearly led by Max Gawn, who had 7 clearances on his own, but just thought it was a disappointing end to what was a finals-like game where across the board they were pretty good, Richmond, but in the last quarter they were absolutely smacked through the midfield. And yeah, I'm just not sure what the answer will be for them when there's not a lot to go to the draft with in the coming years. A lot has been spoken about Brodie Grundy, clearly, and there's a lot of talk that he will find a third club. But I want to ask, what is the benefit to Melbourne letting Brodie Grundy go? It would be an admirable thing to do because you sold him a story that isn't true and you haven't followed through with that. But running a footy club's not a charity, Gerard, and they are in a perfect position. They have an excellent backup ruckman for their main guy who is 32 and susceptible to injury, provided they can keep Grundy engaged and they do give him AFL opportunities and he's not sulking around the footy club. But most clubs don't have one good ruckman. Melbourne have got 2, and I just wouldn't be giving him away for free at the end of the year. I wouldn't.
No, I don't think they'll be doing that unless they're forced into it somehow, but he's a contracted player, so he's going to have to be traded. And I think you make a good point. Melbourne, I mean, the only loser at this stage is Brodie.
Yes.
He may actually end up playing in a premiership side, though. Something happens to Max, or they have a couple of injuries up in the forward line, they go back. He's in a good position right now as far as premierships are concerned, or a crack at one. as long as he gets in the team. Outside of that, it'll be really interesting to see what he does and what he wants to do, because he was sold the first ruck position. That's no longer there.
Yep.
And it's going to be up to him to process how he feels about that.
And up to Melbourne, because he can say that he wants to be traded, but Melbourne
can knock it on the head.
Reject any trade and say, oh, we're in a pretty good spot here. We've got Fremantle's first pick in the draft. Yep. We got a 6-time All-Australian in ripping form and the best backup ruckman in the game. We're pretty happy and comfortable with where our list is at.
The only thing they need, if he goes, is another backup ruckman.
Well, that's the point. Why would you give one when you've already got one and try and find a replacement for that, which seems ridiculous. So I'm not sure whether he'll be at the third club. And if I was Melbourne, I'd be keeping him exactly where he is. And finally, I was just watching Matt Crouch in the last fortnight. He's got to be a starting midfielder for an AFL club next season, doesn't he?
Couldn't agree with you more. I've been looking at Matt Crouch for 3 years, saying, how come someone hasn't taken up gamble on him?
Yeah.
He won an award, I think.
Best and fairest.
Won the best and fairest a few years ago. I'm staggered that Sydney haven't had a crack at him, given that they've got some issues in that area themselves.
Well, I'm looking at like Geelong. So if Geelong don't get a big name like a Parrish or a Bailey Smith who's been spoken about, Crouch is not going to cost you much. He didn't have a suitor last year. Not one person wanted to touch him. He's come straight back into Adelaide's team after spending the whole year playing SANFL. He's played 3 games at AFL level. Against Melbourne on the G, a very good team. He's had 22, 7 clearances and 9 tackles last week. And he got 7 coaches' votes in a showdown against another very good midfield in Port Adelaide with 32 and 12 clearances.
Yep.
So there was no takers, as I said last year. You'd think the last fortnight has completely changed that. And the last 4 weeks will be significant in building his value, and there'll be a few clubs, I reckon, watching him. Like West Coast, you'd offer him 4 years, wouldn't you, if you're West Coast, and say, come and just play every week in our midfield and lead this young group. We need the experience.
Well, you've rightly pointed out 3 clubs now, West Coast, Geelong, Sydney, and there's probably others without having any deep thought about it.
28 years of age. That was the 7 observations. The Harcourt's open line. It's open 1300 736 736. Of course, as always, you can send us a text 0433 98 11 16. Let's get to Daniel Hoyne from Champion Data.
Now on Sports Day, full-on footy analysis with Daniel Hoyne. Thanks to Champion Data, the story behind the game.
Now, Kane, I haven't discussed this with you, but I'm putting this on the table for consideration. Right. The smartest man in football is in. I've got a new segment for him, if you agree. And that segment is, I told you so.
I told you so.
So, Dr. Hoyne, the smartest man in footy. Kane, are you with me on this, Kane?
I'm with you, Gerard.
Okay. I suspect you could start the program with I told you so, and your I told you so this week may well involve the Pies.
I would never do such a thing there, G. I like my Collingwood faithful, and they might not like me going back the other way. So, but no, we'll just steer clear of that one.
I think there could be another I told you so with Melbourne as well.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. So, we have got some right. That's okay, but we just keep it.
Which one are you most proud of? Your I told you so's. I mean, you've been on the Bombers' lack of defence all year.
Geelong really.
Geelong's been your solid contribution.
The Collingwood thing, and there has been a fair bit of talk coming, through the socials since Collingwood got rolled on Friday night, heading my way. But it was more just positive, putting it on the agenda. Mainly positive, but still some negatives there. But it was mainly just putting it on the agenda that Collingwood are the best team in the competition, and I still think that they are the best team in the competition. It's just the gap to the next best isn't as big as what some in the industry thought it was, 4 or 5 weeks ago. So that was the only point that we were talking about with Collingwood. Melbourne, you've been big on Melbourne as well, Kane, so full credit there as well. I mean, you haven't wavered
would they be
too much in there.
Well, I know we're going to get, we may get to them with your overall observations, but would they be your second seed now, or would they have jumped Collingwood to your first seed if you were looking at who is most likely to be there on grand final day?
Geez, they're close to Collingwood, I think, Melbourne, and I've been seat 1A on the Brisbane bandwagon, as you know, for the whole season, and I'll talk about them throughout the observations. Just got a couple of slight concerns that I'm starting to waver a little bit on them, but I think in terms of just getting their balance right, Melbourne between offense and defense. We saw that sort of come to stronger light on the weekend against Richmond. So I think they're right in it. And there's and we mentioned on this show a few weeks ago there are so many similarities to what Melbourne did in 2021. This whole scoring component has been a bit overplayed and we spoke about that. A lot of the time accuracy gets overlooked. So the GWS game, which everyone goes back to the GWS game. Horrendous conditions against what we are now seeing to be the hardest team to crack. In the competition over the last 2 months, they generate 26 shots in terrible conditions against that defensive unit that kicked 5 goals. So the system was actually not going too bad. Just a few things needed to be changed, but they kicked 5 goals and 26 shots was horrendous.
Do you think we're heading to an era where mobility in the forward line is much more appreciated than tall marking forwards who haven't got ground ball gettability?
I think you've got to look at probably Collingwood and GWS now as probably the two real examples. Get your assets in the midfield, get your assets behind the ball, and then generate score off the back of your ball movement game. And to generate score off the back of your ball movement game in the forward 50, mobility, smalls with speed.
All right,
So
let's move it along, Hoyne. Otherwise, we won't get through all of your gold tonight. We'll start with your first overall observation. Is there an update to the top 10 players?
Yeah, so as we do, there's a rolling 4-week update here. So this is our new rating system, the 100X rating system. So just for clarification again, this is based on expectations. So this is based on how far above or below, based on where on the ground you're playing, are you performing to expectation. So as the ratings sit at the moment, Jack Sinclair is the number 1 rated player in the competition, performing 6 rating points above his expectation.
Are you considering him a mid or a halfback?
No, this takes into account all these minutes played in so whether that be across halfback or through the midfield area as well. Dan Houston comes in number 2. He's performing just below Jack Sinclair. Taylor Walker, 3rd. So 3rd highest rated player in the competition. Bontempelli marginally behind him, sitting in 4th. Charlie Curnow has risen from 14th in the rating system 4 weeks ago to 5th now.
Had a good month.
Yeah. Nick Dacos maintains his rating as the 6th best player in the competition. He was also 6th after round 16. Zach Butters also maintains his rating, so he's the 7th best player. Toby Green now comes into the top 10, so he was 11th 4 weeks ago. He's now 8th. Nick Blakey maintains his position inside the top 10 at 9th, and Errol Goulden is number 10. So
who's dropped out?
So just a couple of so there's been 2 inclusions. So Charlie Curnow has come in and Toby Green has come in. Mitch Owens has dropped out, so he's sort of been a little bit quieter over the last 4 weeks, and so too has Nick Martin. He's now gone to 19th in the competition. Just a couple of players I just want to keep a watch of, because we'll do this again in 4 weeks' time, and that will be the final rating system for the year. Dusty is coming with a bullet. So he's gone from 28th to 13th. Tim English coming with a bullet, gone from 57th to 16th. Max Gawn, 53rd to 18th. And Adam Chera is now a top 20 player in the competition based on expectation.
There you have it. You can have your say on that. 0433 98 11 16. Jack Sinclair on expectation, the number 1 rated player by Champion Data in the game. Currently, let's get into your 7 main talking points. What have the Blues done to put themselves in the position that they're in, Hoyne?
So the transition game is the game that we continually talk about on this show. And if you haven't got your transition game in order, in terms of having success throughout the season and towards the end of the season, you're not going to be able to generate that.
And for those just joining us, explain the transition game.
So the transition game is your turnover game. So whether that's sort of winning the ball and denying opposition, moving it from one end of the ground to the other, and then when you have the ball, the ability to be able to win it and then be able to punish the opposition going back the other way. So rounds 1 to 10 last year, when everyone's in love with Carlton, it was purely and simply off the back of what they were doing at stoppage. Their transition game was still a below-average transition game in the competition. And then, that was a red flag despite them being 8-2. And then the results took care of themselves. We talk a lot about on this show. It's how you play, not who you play. So their brand of footy at round 10 last year was going okay, but at red flag, that ended up them missing the final series. This last 6 weeks, this is why, if you're a Carlton supporter, it's a far more sustainable brand of footy that you're playing. In terms of punishing the opposition over the last 6 weeks, you're top 5 in the competition. Last year, after round 10, you were 8th in the competition. In terms of denying, you're top 5 again in the competition. Last year, you were 11th. So that was concerning. Your ball movement game was 10th and 13th offensively and defensively last year. It's now top 6 on both sides of the ball. And, we speak a lot about these role players. If you haven't got these high half-forward flankers in your team, the ability to then be able to compete in the transition game makes it so hard. So the last 6 weeks, these aren't going to be household names, but Cottrell has come into the team to play this role. Cunningham has come into the team to play this role. Fogarty has come into the team to play this role. In the first 13 weeks of the year, combined, those players played one game in those roles.
And so the role you're talking about is the up and back. Get down to the back flank, transition, block it up, come back, and bring the ball forward with you.
Spot on. So then you go to Friday night, and we've lauded Collingwood's ball movement, and that's why they are the most dangerous team in the competition. So their ability to be able to move it and score off it. They had 68 opportunities, Collingwood, on Friday night to be able to do that from the back half. They kicked 3 goals. Collingwood have been kicking roughly about 8, 9, 10 goals off that game alone. So this is why it's such a more sustainable brand of footy that you can take it to the bank, that this is going to generate some success for Carlton, whether it's this year, but as we talked about a few weeks ago, it's a great launching pad for 2024, regardless of what happens for the rest of this year.
I've been pretty scathing on the Dogs, Hoyne. I reckon they need a significant review into what has gone on at the footy club in the off-season. What are you seeing?
So the absolute complete opposite to what we just talked about with Carlton, right there. So you did that game on Saturday, G, and unfortunately for the Dogs at the moment, it's either clearance or nothing. So they dominate clearance in the first half. They get scoreboard return. GWS simply nullify that part of the game, and they're stuffed.
On the weekend, it was Bont or nothing.
So so you have a look at their and this, but to your point, Kane, that you've been making over the last sort of period of time, this isn't new. This is, their transition game has been an issue now for 18 months.
Yep.
So offensively, they're 10th and 10th the last 2 years. Defensively, they've been 8th and 12th in the competition. Their inability to be able to deny the opposition moving the ball has been 10th and 15th for 2 years in a row. That's not going to get it done. That's not going to get it done come preliminary final weekend. And, we talk about Cottrell and Cunningham and Fogarty being the inclusions to Carlton over the last 6 weeks and what that's done to their transition game. The magnets in that role for the Dogs just constantly change week after week. So, so we saw Artie Jones come into the team, for the first, 12, 13 weeks. Haven't seen him since. Riley Garcia, in and out, only played 3 games. McNeil, sub a lot, 11 games, only played 5 full games for the year. Riley West has only come into the team late. McComb has only played 3 games for the year, and only 1 full game. So there's just not that consistency with those role players to complement the stars of McRae and Libba and Bont and Smith. So you think of Chera and Walsh when he's there, and Cripps and these guys going through the midfield. They're the stars. Let them play and let them get the role players around you to be able to do the work that we've seen Richmond do for years, Melbourne do for years, and Geelong implemented last year. The Dogs haven't got them, and until they find them, and it might sound ridiculous, but until they find these blokes to be able to play this role, they're going to be inconsistent, at tease, and they're not going to be able to generate preliminary final success. That's probably so many of us think that they should with that list.
All right, Dogs fans, you can have your say on that. Surely you are frustrated with what is going on and the wasted talent on that list that you've got. Stephen May is up next, Hoyne.
Just want to throw this as a watch. And I'm not declaring it yet, but I reckon it's a watch for us this week when Melbourne play whoever they play. I think it's North Melbourne this week, but just moving forward. So Stephen May all year has played on the opposition's number 1 key forward all year. So you think he's played on Taylor Walker and Curnow on that Friday night, which is a great battle. Hawkins, Danaher, Myercheck, all the best key forwards in the competition he has taken until the weekend. And he took Jack Riewoldt in round 6 against Richmond. He didn't take Jack Riewoldt on the weekend. That was left to Tomlinson. We saw Stephen May win more ball than he has for the majority of the season up the ground than what he has. So he won 43% of his ball across that halfback line, his highest return for the year.
Yep.
He only won 43% of his ball in the D50, his lowest return for the year. So whether or not they're looking at this and going, we can implement something similar to what Harris Andrews has done, who's been one of the best interceptors in the game this season by playing across that halfback line, and then let Adam Tomlinson do the hard work like Jack Payne does. That is going to be an interesting watch moving forward. It was only a one-game sort of sample size, but just want to just put it on the agenda. Does he go to Nick Larkey this week? And if he doesn't go to Nick Larkey, that's when the confidence in this sort of comes to play, that this is a late move and a late magnet change.
A very important player, Tomlinson, for them, because he frees up Lever in many respects. And as you're saying now, he frees up May, but he is allowed Petty to go forward.
Yeah, and I just want to put Tomlinson on the radar as well. And I think this is why it's an interesting move for Melbourne. So he got stiffed in 2021. He would have been part of that premiership team if he didn't do his ACL at about round 8 or 9. So that got Harrison Petty into the team. Over the last 3 years, he's the 5th hardest person to beat in a one-on-one contest, and he's the 2nd best player in the competition at winning a one-on-one contest. So that to me is the magnet that could be used to play on the opposition's number 1 key forward to be able to free up Stephen May even more. So just to confirm, 5 games, decided under 2 goals, haven't won one.
Haven't won one.
So Gerard's gone with the Dogs, or he's gone with Essendon, or he's gone with Geelong. There's been a bit of Sydney here. So the answer to this question is Geelong. And the reason why I was just thinking about it over the weekend when watching Geelong lose another close one is how much did we underestimate the loss of Selwood just from a leadership perspective and what that actually does. Like so often for years we've seen Geelong nail the close ones more often than not. So the last 2 years in games decided by under 2 goals, they've got an 8 win and 6 loss ratio. So if you extrapolate that out this year to a great, to a 3-2 return in those 5 games, they're sitting half a game outside the top 4 again. So their percentage is the 4th best in the competition. They're sitting just outside the top 4, not playing great, but they're hovering around. So, you think, and just I'll get this, but, I'll get people that come through. I said that they haven't won one. So they drew against the Swans. Okay. And in that game, led it by 2 points with a minute to go.
They should have lost that game. If
they
it
should.
Wasn't for Sydney missing shots,
they were terrible.
Dropping marks from the top goal square.
They were terrible, but even in that last play with a minute to go, so often you just see Geelong just be able to ice that with a minute to go. So it's just
and it's likely to cost them a spot in the 8.
Yeah, and whether or not they make it or not, they're no real threat this year to be able to do anything sort of of serious note anyway. So it might be a blessing in disguise for them to actually miss finals and actually get a bit of a break. But I just think from a leadership perspective, something that we can't really sort of deep dive into from a numbers sense. Just the loss of Selwood this year, how much has that actually impacted them, as a whole in terms of where they sit on the ladder in 2023.
Yeah, their midfield's an absolute mess. Right, now we'll get to the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, so as I said before, I've been sitting in seat 1A of the Lions, and we spoke about it a few weeks ago that there's been no team in the competition for 8 years that's been better at punishing you on turnover, which is such a critical aspect of the game. Last 2 weeks, red flags in this area for the Brisbane for the first time all year. So
it's a worrying sign when it comes at a stage where you're on the runway, Hoyne.
Yes, so the runway that me and King, sort of keep touching on about, that you're ready to take off now. You do not want to have red flags in your game. So the strike rate component, which I'm not a massive fan of, but I know Kingy's a huge fan of it. So that's looking at how many points you score per 100 turnovers, right? So the first 18 weeks of the year, Brisbane are scoring 88 points per 100 turnovers on the opposition. Number 1 in the competition. Don't even look for second. The last 2 weeks, that's dropped to 32 points per 100 turnovers.
Okay.
So they cannot punish you at the moment based on what they've done the last 2 weeks.
One of the great punishers is not punishing, though, in Charlie Cameron.
Well, I don't think he's actually getting a genuine look. I thought he looked really dangerous against Sean Lemons on the weekend, but he just didn't get the quality in terms of the entries that Brisbane had been able to generate so often going inside forward 50. So, and I've just had a look at a couple of players over the last couple of weeks. I know that we've spoken a lot about Lachie Neale. Lachie Neale's a star, but I also want to put a couple of players on the radar. So I feel like this guy constantly gets talked about, and that's Cam Rayner, that everyone's waiting for him to explode. He's had 6 score involvements the last 2 weeks.
I got my hand up. I've been seduced by Cam Rayner too often.
Yeah, but I don't think that you're alone. It's just, so 6 score involvements over the last 2 weeks. Jared Berry, we're just waiting.
Having a really
waiting for Jared.
Year.
4 score involvements in 2 weeks. And then the other one that we've been waiting for, and we're just thinking, he's going to be a huge inclusion when he comes back into the team, is Dane Zorko. 6 score involvements in 2 weeks. So, yes, Lachie Neale was quiet on the weekend, but these guys, so outside of Dunkley and Neale, these are the guys that need to elevate their game to be able to come along with Neale and be able to come along with Dunkley. And
cover for Neale of his day.
Yeah, so that's the concern for me. It's a 2-week period. I don't like absolutely labelling it over just a 2-week period, but they are absolutely on watch, and that is the only thing that I'm looking for on Sunday night against Fremantle. If they don't get this back for a 3rd week in a row, that is absolute alarm bells for Brisbane if they don't get that back on Sunday night.
A lot of St Kilda supporters want Matt Crouch down at the Saints next year. Coming through on the text.
Yeah, I wouldn't be going Matt Crouch if I'm St Kilda. I think Matt Crouch could fit elsewhere. I think St Kilda already have a couple of those players. And I don't think they need. I don't think they need another Matt Crouch in that list.
Tell us about the Saints. What did you notice? They could score again, particularly in bursts.
Yeah, they did. So that first quarter, a bit freakish. So I wouldn't be banking on that sort of happening again if you're a St Kilda supporter. Five goals from centre bounce. He's lucky to score 5 goals from centre bounces in 5 weeks. So to do that in a quarter was pretty freakish, but well done to them. The part for me, if they're actually going to play a role in September and actually make finals to actually start with, their ball movement game is going to be their point of difference. So to get their run and to get their sort of flow going from the back half, that's going to be their difference. We saw in the first 6 weeks of the year they were the best ball movement team in the competition, and then their ability to be able to win contest in open play, so to be able to keep running contest to contest, was the 4th best in the competition. Then for a 10-week period, that dropped to a mid-table sort of ranking. And in all due respect, they probably don't have the talent to allow that to drop to a mid-table ranking, then to be able to sort of pick up the pieces elsewhere. That's their absolute one wood. The last 5 weeks, their ball movement has come back to 3rd, and their contest game in general space to be able to run contest to contest has come back to 3rd in the competition. That is their great hope, to be able to hold on to wherever they are, 5th, 6th, 7th, wherever they are on the ladder at the moment, to get themselves on the grid to play September. If that ranking stays at 3rd for the next 4 weeks, they're going to be every chance to find themselves playing September footy. If it drops to a mid-table, they're probably going to bundle straight out.
Has Ross had to do what Melbourne did, and that's just concede a bit on defence to free up attack?
I'm not so sure on that. I think it was just such a Sicily-focused method on the weekend, given what Sicily did to them a couple of months ago. So so they play Carlton this week. What happens with sort of a Wiedering who's in absolute red hot nick at the moment? That's going to be interesting whether or not they actually adopt as a very similar philosophy to be able to generate scoreboard return off that. I'll be interested to see what happens in that phase.
All right, we've already spoken just a little bit about Matt Crouch, but you wanted to speak about him as well, Hoyne.
Yeah, so we're on the same page here, Kane. It's always nice when we're on the same page together. So I just wanted to put him on the agenda. I mean, like as you said, I think you alluded to it quite well in what you're saying, Kane. But I'm just interested to see whether or not he's. They've sent him back to the sample to rework him and to get him into to become a more damaging, impactful midfielder. Yeah. So he has never had any issue in terms of being able to win the footy and be able to actually sort of win contests and win clearance. His clearance numbers have sort of never sort of been a top 15, top 20 player in the competition, which might surprise people. They've been okay, but they haven't sort of been that top 20 player. But his ability to be able to turn possession into scores has never sort of really been at the top echelon of midfielders. for him to have 20 score involvements over the last 2 weeks, against really good opposition, to me suggests that perhaps he has been reworked, and that's why it's taken him so long to actually come back into the AFL system. So to only play 3 games or sort of 1 game up until the last 2 weeks in the AFL system. I think that's great coaching, and I think that's sort of, to me, that's the aspect that we sort of keep talking about on this show a lot. Everyone sort of keeps reverting to disposals. It's not about disposals. It's about the impact that you're having on matches. Yeah. So 20 score involvements in 2 weeks. We very rarely would have seen Matt Crouch, even at his best, have 20 score involvements in 2 weeks. So I think, so I think full credit to him, full credit to Adelaide, and as you guys touched on early on in the show, if he keeps going like this, I'll be surprised if Adelaide actually want to get rid of him. But then he might find himself, in sort of hot property at the end of the season.
Yeah, it might be good for him to go. I mean, they've still got Berry. I think Pedler's going to have to play more time on ball. But Schoenberg, they're going to want to play because he's younger. So I think for him and the club, it's probably a better thing that he does move on. Laird's going to be there for another couple of years still. Keys is going to be there. So probably a tough midfield mix for him to fit in, and that's hurt him as well. But I don't think he'll be short of suitors. Speaking about coaches, who did they miss on the weekend? We'll start in the Geelong game.
Yeah, so Lockie Schultz. So well done to Lockie Schultz. He didn't get a vote on the weekend from the coaches.
That's a couple of times now he's missed out.
Yeah, so he's gone under the radar a little bit this year. But so we had him as the 3rd highest rated player on the ground. That was actually his 2nd highest rated performance for the season. Was able to actually get up and down the ground, as I keep talking about these role players. So 19 disposals, but was then able to get back and actually impact the scoreboard, kicking 2 goals as well. So he was extremely impactful for Freo in what they did.
No love for Tim English?
No, I was surprised by this.
I wasn't.
No?
Last quarter.
Faded
badly, and Kieran Briggs came over the top after having a pretty average first half.
Yeah, okay. No, well, you're probably going to be surprised by this then. So we had him as the 2nd highest rated player.
He was dominant to half time.
Yeah.
And was significant. He was, okay in the 3rd quarter, but the last quarter failed.
Right out of gas, yeah. So we had him as the 2nd highest rated player on the ground on Sunday. So that's actually really interesting debate in terms of who do you give it to, Kieran Briggs or Tim English. Both had fantastic performances.
Cross him off the list. Let's go to a player who hasn't been recognised for a fair time, I wouldn't imagine.
No, hasn't been, and he's sort of never really come high up on our rating system. But this is Brandon Ellis in the game against Brisbane on the weekend. So we had him as the highest rated player on the ground. That was actually his 3rd highest rated game of his career.
Really?
So
he's been reworked by the new coach.
And that, and absolutely. And that was all down to his impact with ball use. So often you've seen Brandon sort of rack up 25, 30 disposals, but there's no real damage and real impact with what he does ball in hand. Only had 21 disposals, but it was all forward. It was all creativity. It was the ability to be able to really impact the game with what he did. So that's an interesting one just to track forward there.
The
for
other
Gold
one's
Coast.
Atkins as well at Gold Coast. He's getting big numbers. I thought we'd never see him again, and we've hardly seen him in that 4-year deal under Stewie Dew, and he's just come in and he's getting 30 every week. So I don't know. Maybe he's revitalised as well, as is Chad Warner, who is one of the most watchable players in the game. And I'm with you, Hoyne. I thought he was excellent. I did this game on Saturday night. I thought his ball use, particularly going inside 50, was damaging.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And I think that's when he's at his best, Chad, when he's getting ball forward of centre and really impacting the game in that phase of the game. But so we had him as the 2nd highest rated player on the ground. Didn't get a vote from the coaches. I just want to put this on the radar in terms of the role that he's playing. So, his games between round 4 to 14, he only spent 12% of his game time inside the forward 50. His last 3 matches, that's now up to 40% game time playing inside forward 50. So he's now, over the last 3 weeks, become a 60-40 mid-forward. So that's going to be really interesting to see whether
he's the Dusty model.
Yeah, or, sort of Dusty Petrarca sort of model. So that's interesting to see whether or not the Swans implement that moving forward over the next 4 weeks. We talked about them last week. They're actually in good nick, the Swans. So one to keep an eye on.
All right, and who did Ross give no love to?
Yeah, so neither coach gave any love to Dan Butler here on the weekend. 2nd highest rated player on the ground. 4 goals. Was also sort of created three more score assists, and that was his 2nd highest rated game of the season and a season high 17 disposals. So he was extremely impactful there for St Kilda.